We're excited for this final session here. It's called Ensuring Responsible CDR Development. It's led by Jen Winter. Jennifer is a professor in economics in the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary. Within the CanCO2Re project, Jennifer is coordinating the activity on cost-effective policy options in Canada. Please join me in welcoming Jen.
Okay, everyone. This is on. You can hear me? Good. All right. So welcome. And I don't actually know if we're going to be talking about ensuring responsible CDR development. In that,
wait, what?
Stacey, Carson, and Sean gave me an hour, and I picked 3 interesting people who I wanted to have a conversation with. So that's what we're doing. And since you all have devices, at least one device in front of you, I'm not going to introduce my panelists because you can look them up on the internet. But I am going to ask each of them to introduce themselves with a fun fact. And I sprung this on them right at the start of the debate. So they've been nice, and they've spent the last 20 minutes frantically trying to come up with something interesting about themselves. So to make up for it, I'm going to share 2 fun facts about myself. One is inspired by Juan's talk. I've used ChatGPT maybe 2 times, possibly 3, but definitely 2, and that's it. And the other fun fact is sort of like in the spirit of emissions reduction is that I've actually gotten to drive a vehicle at Environment Canada's emissions test facility, and it was really hard because the axis was flipped. So it was like a video game, but really, really hard. And the other thing I'll mention about myself is I'm also the Departmental Science Advisor at Environment and Climate Change Canada. I'm on a partial interchange from the University of Calgary doing that. And so anything I say today is my own personal opinion and not representing the Government of Canada or ECCC. Okay, let's get started. Brian. What is your fun fact?
To be honest, these chairs are a lot more wobbly than I expected. Kind of focused on core stabilization right now.
We can't talk. We're busy tightening our cores.
Yeah. So Bryan Helfenbaum, Vice President of Clean Energy with Alberta Innovates. It has been a pleasure to be here the last day and a half. It wasn't 20 minutes trying to think of a fun fact. It was 20 minutes trying to do something fun so that I could then have something to share with you. I guess I was involved in the development of and later lived in a co-housing development, which is an intentional community around shared resources. So
cool.
Something interesting.
That is not something I knew about you.
There you go.
Okay, perfect. April.
I'm April Hillier. Nice to see everyone here today. I'm an independent advisor to many of these projects that are starting up and try to work their way through concept to FID and to operationalization. Fun fact about me. Well, let's see. I've got 2, so I'm going to share 2. First, something you might not know. I am a descendant of the Mayflower, so I'm American, and I'm registered. I have a number, apparently. Like a dog, I don't know. The other thing to know is that I spend my summers catching lobsters with my bare hands.
Wow. Yeah.
You got to work for
New
it.
Englander.
I am a New Englander.
Do the people at the restaurant get upset with you?
Well, no, they're mine. It's like off the beach. If I can get them with my bare hands, I can have them and I can eat them. And you?
And I'm Grant Bishop. I'm one of the partners at a firm, Foundation Economics. We provide analysis and forecasting on different compliance carbon markets to asset owners and investors. And my fun fact is that my first job was as a summer camp counselor. That was the nucleation of my own passion for sustainability, but the additional fun parts of it is, as a consequence, I own 5 paddles, and I became known at the camp for singing a song, campfire song, called Toast, that I ended up singing at some social occasion in every subsequent job. So
Well,
sounds like a
He
challenge.
should sing.
Well, no, we're,
Is what I
you don't want it here.
Yeah.
It's a campfire.
Now everyone wants to buy you a beer.
Well, that's often how it comes out.
Okay, all right. Let's get started talking about CDR. So I think maybe I'll start with Grant and then go to April, and then Bryan, you can tack on if you'd like. So over the course of the last 2 days, we've heard a lot about sort of economic, policy, regulatory, science, technological challenges about or facing CDR technologies. And I guess like to start off with, like what, in your view, like what are the most important economic, policy, and regulatory challenges? And what are current policy supports, and how do they help address the challenges?
Yeah, cool. And I should have my upfront disclaimer of imposter syndrome. Jen arm twisted me into this panel, and with the caveat that I don't actually spend that much time, if any, on CDR. The compliance markets that my partners and I look at, in those, CDR is not yet material in price formation or the supply and demand balances that we build. And I think this goes to this tension between the near term of CDR and the long term of CDR, where it will be at that net zero point in the future, the price setting margin, but in the near term, there's a real question about the robustness of the incentives for its deployment. And for its deployment, I think I'd frame everything in that classic investor lens of net present value. One requires dependable future revenue stream that compensates the outlays of capital at a risk of return commensurate with the risk. And right now, the risk, because of the nature of the carbon markets on which CDR depends, is really high for those future cash flows. And so maybe just to walk through some of the ways that governments have constructed ways of that markets have been created to provide value for these projects. First, we've heard great talk about the voluntary carbon markets. As I mentioned, my partners and I are focused on compliance markets. We don't spend so much time on those, and that is with the voluntary carbon markets, and that is with a view that those are unlikely to be very deep in the long term and provide for the sort of scaling necessary to really see CDR at scale. And the reason for that is those that you have investing at this time in those CDR projects for the voluntary offsets that they generate are the kind of firms that have very high profit relative to their GHGs and have a branding value that they can get from being able to claim the reductions at net zero at a very low cost relative to their overall cash flows. And for the long term, I think to look at any CDR at scale, one needs to be looking at compliance carbon markets, the sort of markets that governments create by regulations that they impose on industrial emitters or the suppliers of fossil fuels. And just we could talk more about each of these markets, but for large industrial emitters looking to markets that are cap and trade like, for example, the EU ETS, or California, Quebec's linked systems, or those that have a background government price, like Alberta's TIER regulation. All of these are output-based pricing systems for now, a large consequence of the need within the design of industrial carbon pricing to address competitiveness issues for the emitters that face a carbon price. The other type of carbon market that I think potentially provides durable value for CDR are the sorts of markets that are carbon intensity based. All of the low carbon fuel standards, what Canada at the federal level has recently implemented as a clean fuel regulation. Those potentially provide the price for different credits that would compensate CDR at the level to see the scale of deployment necessary to see advances in the technology. Also, of course, governments do use tax credits. We can talk more detail about those. And there are other institutions that here in Canada we've begun to make use of. The Canada Infrastructure Bank, the Canada Growth Fund are two good examples of government introducing pools of capital that can help different projects get off the ground, lowering their cost of capital, signaling to markets about the potential of a technology. The Canada Infrastructure Bank works by financing debt and equity at concessional levels. The Canada Growth Fund has a variety of tools, including equity investments, but the one that has gained a lot of attention is what is being short-formed as contracts for difference on different carbon markets, which practically have been implemented as offset offtake agreements in the recent financings here in Alberta. So hopefully that gives the initial rundown, and yeah.
April?
Yeah, I think maybe you've covered so many of them and super well. I think there's one thing that we didn't talk about, and it's maybe Alberta specific, are the grant funding, the non-dilutive grant funding that could come from, say, ERA, Alberta Innovates. Federal government often has the non-dilutive grants that some of these projects could qualify for. So those are important also to consider when you're doing your project finance model and trying to put a whole stack together, right? Like you got to get, I call it a mosaic, like it's so complex in terms of all of the things that you can put together in these project finance models, and it's difficult to navigate the mosaic to understand when you're eligible, what projects require which things, how to quantify the benefits that you would receive from each of them. It becomes quite a complex mosaic of trying to figure out what the actual project finance model will look like. But to the extent that you can leverage all of those things and stack them when you are allowed to stack them, they can really become beneficial to making a difference for your project. So there's that piece. The non-dilutive grant funding is important to seek as hard as it is to secure.
Maybe, I think the stacking is a very interesting characteristic of the environment we're in right now. And at one level, it provides different streams of value for different decarbonization projects writ large, including, say, renewable energy deployment. But a problem with these different overlapping but differentiated measures is that they can muck up the price signals in one or another of the markets. So I'll give the example of the collapse we've seen recently in California LCFS prices, which has at its root the great supply of hydrogenation-derived renewable diesel cramming into California. When you think about what sets the price for credits in the margin, it is the price required to compensate the marginal fuel. And if that's the price-setting fuel coming into the margin, you, because it's a drop-in substitute for diesel, need to compensate its differential with diesel. But hydrogenation-derived renewable diesel, HDRD, also gets tax credits from the US IRA under 45Z. It also benefits from the price of D4 RINs under the US EPA's renewable fuel standard. What I'm pointing to in all this is that particular fuel derives a bunch of value going to what it would price at in a wholesale market, and therefore set the price of credits in the California LCFS market. But it is in turn interfering with the value received by other products in that California LCFS market. And I think this is particularly relevant for this audience because the California LCFS is one of the regimes that uniquely does allow for the compensation of direct air capture. Indeed, you can issue direct air capture based credits in the California LCFS for a project situated anywhere in the world. which is an interesting feature that California has embedded, but still we have not seen any LCFS credits for DAC issued in the market so far because there is such price uncertainty. And going that direction, you're fighting with all the other compliance options that are pressing prices down. Right now in California LCFS market, I think credits are trading at around $50 per ton.
Interesting comment though on that, because we don't see that happening in BC. Like in BC, right?
Okay.
So BC you can stack like a CFR credit
Correct.
with a BC LCFS credit. So you don't see the same destruction in the value.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I think it's coming. And in fact, you have seen BC
We're
LCFS
talking-
prices.
This is going exactly.
Sorry.
You have seen BC LCFS prices coming down in recent months.
It's like $400.
No, they're down at 250.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would say this is actually being driven by the value that the suppliers of the same fuel can get out of the CFR. And Jen didn't allow slides, but I have a great slide about how the CFR will require more clean fuel supply measured in megatons than any and all of the provincial regimes added up. And so I think this is a feature, right? That the regime that binds is going to be where the price is set. One of the interesting things about, none of these, oh, sorry, go on, Jen.
Well, we can come back to that. Maybe. Bryan, do you have anything to add from your innovation space?
You know what? I'm going to say no. We've covered it well, and I'm going to transparently dodge this one as a crown corporation. Sometimes the government will come to us to, get technical advice on policy development. But otherwise, we stay in our lane. We don't get involved in, especially commenting publicly about policy.
Yeah. Okay, then I think I'll ask you a somewhat related question, and I'm going off script now since you two had your little tangent.
There was a script?
Or I guess this is like, and I'm not being facetious, but it's like, why does Alberta Innovate exist? In the what is its role?
What's the economist case? What market failure are you solving?
No, it's like, what is its role in technology development and net zero, and is it playing in the CDR space yet or at all? And I clearly did not do my homework.
Okay, well, thank you for the existential crisis I'm now
That's two.
yeah.
You and Erica.
It's been a tough day. Fundamentally, Alberta Innovates, it has kind of the 3 C's of capital, connections, and coaching. And people really focus on the first C of capital because that's why people engage with us. Often when they come to us, what they really need is coaching and connections or community. And so often it's like, we want money. I'm like, yeah, you've got something here, but the worst thing I could do for you is actually give you that money because you don't have a customer, you don't have, a supply chain, you don't have anything. So here's some coaching, here's some connections, let's move on that. But from a funding perspective, where we really operate is in that TRL 3 to 7 range, right? Sometimes referred to as the valley of death of innovation. Right? It's things are getting too expensive for academia, but they're still too risky for industry or venture capital. And so we really play that role to help, and I'll say anybody. So we work with academics, small and medium enterprises, large corporations who have very skilled staff, but from a capital allocation perspective, sometimes struggle to move these early stage innovations along. And so we're there to help at that TRL 3 to 7 range. And then we also work with a trusted partner network like Emissions Reduction Alberta, NRCan, they're both in the room, and they help get from 7 to 9 and beyond, right? And so being able to help these technologies, so we're not so much building companies as we are building technologies. And the technologies that we want to build are those that are going to have economic, environmental, and social benefits for the people of Alberta. And so we offer, I'll argue, the best money you can get. It's non-dilutive financing. We don't take equity, we don't take IP. All we really ask for are reports. We get paid back in royalties and taxes later, right? And so we are taking some upfront risk. We have well, we take a lot of risks. Sometimes we take flack. Government officials will point at a project and say, you wasted a bunch of money investing in that. I'm like, well, sure, but we invested in 10 projects, 20 projects, expecting 30%, 40% of them are going to fail. And honestly, if we have a really high success rate in our investments, then that would signal that we're not actually investing in innovation, right? We're investing in optimization or a sure thing, right? And our whole raison d'etre, as you say, is to be that risk capital, to take the chance, to have that long-term thinking, because we have the ability to think in years, 3, 5 years, whereas industry is so focused quarter at a time, to have that long-term view to be able to advance these technologies.
Brian, can I push then?
Grant?
I mean, so public good of knowledge, but funded by a limited geography. I mean, how can Alberta be sure that the public good of innovation that you have financed accrues to value to the province?
To Alberta. Well, so the number one question we ask is, what is the commercial potential for this for the province of Alberta? That's the fundamental that we're trying to do. We're also trying to create local jobs. We want to do the piloting. We want to do the work here as best we can. We want to help create the workforce of tomorrow, investing in our people at post-secondaries and elsewhere. But that is the fundamental. Do we always get it right? Not necessarily. Markets can change over the course of a project or a series of projects. But fundamentally, we're looking for those opportunities that squarely have an impact in Alberta. And so, you know, a simple example, we will invest in a technology to convert bitumen into carbon fiber, right? Great opportunity, and also, well, we have that bitumen feedstock pretty clearly here, and there is a market. Whereas a hydrogen technology, there's, okay, well, this could get applied in Alberta, but would it get applied here? And so we have to look at the market dynamics as well to understand, you know, the pathway to commercialization of the technology to ensure that it's going to benefit the people of Alberta.
Grant just wants to interview everyone. Okay, let's do a little bit of big picture thinking, and it's like when we're thinking about like getting from here to net zero emissions, we have governments of Canada have employed a lot of policy tools, either like regulatory requiring compliance, financial incentives in the form of risk capital, investment tax credits, et cetera, et cetera. Do we think we're missing any important policy tools, either like on the fiscal side or for technological development? And like, are there any options for improving the way we do things?
You can go. Or,
Oh, no, have at her.
oh, okay,
I
cool.
can't wait to see what's on those notes.
Didn't have slides, but made some notes. So, I mean, I guess, Jen, I would point to kind of 3 things that government should be focused on in formulating and streamlining the way carbon policy is done. One is policy certainty and consistency. The other is market depth, breadth, and liquidity. And the third, following from that, is market information. That governments presently, in Canada, it was my main focus, are doing fairly poorly today. For policy certainty, we're dealing with short horizons, maybe to 2030, of where governments have mapped policy out, and the kinds of decisions in decade or more lived infrastructure require cash flows beyond that horizon. The point about policy consistency was that pancaking, some overlap, but policies that include some incentives for some things but not others, mucking up signals in markets. That would be what I would point to in consistency. For market breadth, depth, liquidity, we are dealing in Canada right now for our compliance markets, the CFR actually aside, with fragmented, balkanized markets. The federal OBPS for large industrial emitters applies in Manitoba, PEI, and the territories, which are small provinces for emissions comparatively. Otherwise, Alberta stands alone, BC stands alone, Ontario stands alone, Quebec, albeit linked with California for the purpose of Canadian climate policy, stands alone. And linking those, providing wider ambit for the credits and offsets that you can choose is the next horizon, or trade is the next horizon, I would suggest, for deepening Canadian carbon policy. Going to a federal regime is the logical direction. Of that.
So you mean fungibility across provinces, for example?
But I mean, put bluntly, I mean, is Quebec willing to fund CCS projects in Alberta or buy credits from Alberta industrial emitters who have a somewhat favorable crediting mechanism under the way that TIER works, which I am very happy to elaborate.
But like in a situation like in Alberta, for example, in carbon markets, we're a little bit oversupplied. And potentially, like with more projects coming on, there will be continue to have supply outstrip demand. One of the ways we might be able to address that is if there is fungibility of those credits across provinces. So not every province can generate these kinds of credits. Like we have for example, the geology for CCS, much better than other provinces, right?
Yes.
Like, so this idea of allowing these projects to develop here and still have create more demand, new demand for the credits that are generated in Alberta would potentially, I think, change the pricing of the credits, the value of the credits, and the way we can, the carbon market will operate and function. Like, I think it'll function better if we could do those sorts of things.
I agree. A problem is that all of our industrial pricing systems are output-based, but they apply different benchmarks to different industries. So the carbon intensity, or excuse me, the emissions intensity that any facility's products are credited allowable emissions at. The difference of Alberta's system is that it is facility-based and based on grandfathered emissions intensity. So like Cold Lake, which is a very intense, emissions-intensive oil sands SAGD project, or in situ project, has a very high benchmark compared to, say, Christina Lake, right? And so that is actually one of the roots of our oversupply in Alberta, or the bank of credits that has been created to date. The fact that as we moved from the prior regime, short-lived, the carbon competitiveness incentive regulation, which was product-based for benchmarks, we moved actually back from to the scheme that had been in place for the Seeger regulation to a facility-based standard that gives high emissions-intensive assets a preferential benchmark. And that, if you sort of think about the symmetry of that step diagram, means that you have much less demand than you do supply of these credits.
So is the solution to the oversupply then more about increasing stringency or not allowing free allocations? What if everything's priced?
Right. And so I think that is the ultimate future of carbon markets, that we run down, as the EU ETS is envisioning, the output-based pricing part of our emissions pricing systems and go to something purely cap and trade. I mean, the other thing of Alberta's market relative to Quebec is that it has no fixed cap on emissions. It has in the background the price at which you can buy credits from the government to meet your obligations, but no limit on the number of credits that you can buy. Sorry,
Grant. He really, really loves carbon markets. And I have trouble not also loving carbon markets. April, Bryan.
Back to your original question in terms of a gap. If I can remember your original question. Again, I don't typically talk about policy, but I'll pick on federal policy here in a sense of the exclusion of carbon utilization for enhanced oil recovery is a notable exclusion and an unfortunate one. Because in terms of the most scalable, valuable opportunity today that isn't dependent on a price for carbon, which is very volatile right now, that is a very real market, right? It's one that's being used, and there's so much more capacity. The Alberta carbon trunk line is only 10% full. There are hungry end users at the other end that could use that to basically produce a low carbon barrel of oil. So in terms of a tangible intermediary step towards that net zero, we see the CCUS opportunity, the EOR opportunity as being very significant. But unfortunately, current regulations exclude it from policy incentives.
Well, excluded from the ITC,
From the ITC.
but not from the offset. There is an offset protocol in Alberta, as you know.
Yes. Sorry, I'm specifically talking about the federal ITC.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
a gap. That's a big gap.
So that's an instance of where like a specific economic activity doesn't have access to the full suite of policy tools that other economic activities that are like perhaps judged to be morally superior.
Yeah, so it's a pick winners and losers problem.
But I mean, EOR also does, I mean, taking the government's, I mean, I think there was some politics behind that decision. But I think there is a rationale that EOR benefits from having a value stream from the oil extracted that sequestering in saline aquifers does not. So yeah, but I mean, I agree.
To incentivize greater capture and utilization, it's a lever that is not being used to its full extent.
Okay, I'm going to get to audience questions in a second. I want to maybe like follow up and push back on some of Grant's comments. In that, like, yes, it would be like, from an economic perspective, like an economic efficiency perspective, having one Canadian carbon market would be like much better, like lower transaction costs, deeper market, like more liquid, more players, more traders, et cetera. That sort of ignores the Constitution.
No. I mean,
Okay.
Dave's here, will no doubt pipe up about the. Sorry.
Yeah, your question.
Yes. No, I mean
But it's like it's the role of the federal government is to set minimum standards, and then provinces can choose to develop their own policy regimes that are equivalent to the federal minimum standard. And so it really is a provincial choice to have a self-contained market, and this is not a problem specific to environmental policy. So,
I mean, on the Constitution, I think it actually plays the other way. I mean, it's the federal government's choice whether the provincial carbon pricing systems meet their minimum national standard for carbon price stringency. So the federal government has the backstop that they can kick in any province. And you're right, I mean, a province could say, hey, we're going to maintain our own carbon pricing system atop that. But it really, I mean, it is really the federal government that gets to choose, does your provincial system meet our stringency? And if it doesn't, we'll kick into place our OBPS.
but my point, sorry guys, my point was it is the provincial systems, or provincial governments, provinces and territories, that are deciding to not allow, to not recognize credits in other provinces.
Totally. But I mean, I guess my press is the future. Well, and so it is worthwhile talking. I don't mean to pivot entirely, but I mean, in the background is lurking the carbon border adjustment mechanism that has been long lingering as a potential policy direction, but I would press for trade law reasons would require a single national carbon market. The reason is that you can't have a discriminatory price placed on imports that doesn't reconcile with the price facing your own domestic producers. And there's case law from the WTO as well that you can't have an average of a bunch of prices across subnational regimes for what you apply as the border carbon adjustment. I think we're, for political reasons, particularly to do with our neighbor to the south, its current administration, probably not implementing that in the next horizon of this administration. But it is the long-term, more efficient direction to address the competitiveness carbon leakage challenges that we have very awkwardly tried to get at with our OBPS systems. That's that's their logic, as well as the constitutional logic in Canada that no province could impose a border carbon adjustment itself. Yeah.
Okay. Anything to add before I go to the audience? No? Okay, happy. I've gotten through 2 of my questions and I have more, but I thought you guys might also want to ask questions. Dave has a question.
Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks to you all for a great panel. We're in the realm of equitably sharing atmospheric space, but I noticed there was maybe not equitable sharing of the microphone space. So I encourage everyone to respond to this question. The reason why I got up right away is because I think it builds on where you all were going. And so Canada is a federalist nation, right? We've got 3 territories and 10 provinces and a federal government. Unlike the United States, there is not plenary power over greenhouse gas emissions. So yes, the Supreme Court upheld a minimum national price on greenhouse gas emissions, but it's just that minimum price. And so unlike in the US, the federal government can't come in and say, okay, here's the national price, or here's our new national cap and trade mechanism. Although the Harper government in 2008 did propose the most comprehensive carbon market policy approach in the history of Canada, and it would have been amazing if that had been implemented way back then. So my question then is, given those constitutional realities, and even from an economist perspective, not necessarily a legal perspective, how would you create a national carbon market that does this great holy grail unifying of markets? And I'll lead you a little bit. One question that I think a number of us have been asking for more than a decade is, if you could get everyone to the table, why not create an EU-like burden sharing agreement that defines the budgets, the carbon budgets for each jurisdiction, that defines the caps and the ceilings so that that price signal can then run across borders based on what's been agreed to?
I took David's lead too, that maybe I had dominated the mic too much, so I'm happy to respond to that. But.
I mean, go right ahead.
I mean, just on your suggestion, Dave, that there be carbon budgets per province, I actually think that would result in a whole, again, patchwork of different carbon prices, because the marginal cost of abatement in each province is going to be different. I mean, you also are, I mean, I assume what you're pointing to is, should we have a cap and trade system imposed in every province so that there is certainty about the quantity of emission reductions?
That's right. So that marginal abatement, the actual sharing of burdens would actually be based on the cost to try to get that right. But then that's not a budget per province. That's the ability to have fungible instruments across the federation.
Right.
So, and Dave, like that is, I think, the mechanism that we have to move to in the long term. Respect your point about the plenary power. I mean, you're probably aware that I pressed that the Supreme Court should have gone the direction of construing greenhouse gases as the national concern, as they did as a single, indivisible, distinct matter for aeronautics, radio communications, nuclear power. And respectfully, I think the Supreme Court took an out of blessing a policy with some tautological definition of the national concern. I mean, if you can have minimum national standards for greenhouse gases, what can you not have minimum national standard, or minimum national standards for greenhouse gas pricing? What can you not have minimum national standards for? You are much deeper on that constitutional case law, but my recollection of the Supreme Court's decision is that they said that it's certainly game for the federal government to impose a national cap and trade strategy. They walked through the different schemes for carbon pricing and said, you know, fair game if you want to impose it as a, not a constitutional term, but as in an economist term, a tax, or if you want to impose this as a tradable permit, auctionable permit mechanism. And I see no reason that under that articulation of the power, the federal government could say, we're imposing across the federation a cap and trade system. Provinces, you can have higher prices through your own regimes if you want, but this regime is applying to greenhouse gases everywhere. Do you disagree?
No, it's that last bit that's the challenge, though, right? So there's always going to be ample space for the provinces to do whatever they want above that floor.
Yeah.
And that's when you get the market fragmentation all over again. And then there's going to be equivalencies across the provinces are going to have to demonstrate that their system is equivalent, but that means it can be different. So in other words, ideally, the perfect world, right, is plenary power, where the federal government can just dictate, here is the market, we're not negotiating it, go forward. And that just doesn't exist in our constitutional system.
Well, but they can certainly impose a nationwide market, which for all practical purposes would say to provinces, why play additionally, right? I mean,
Okay.
Last point. Last point.
Okay.
This picks up on Melody's point yesterday morning. If the objective is to be politically difficult, it won't work. And the objective in a lot of provinces right now is to be politically difficult.
so, well, yeah, fair. Well, but that's the hammer that the federal government has. I mean, I would say in Alberta, I mean, we have oversupply because the federal government, when TIER was proposed, did not, I would assert, have the confidence or internal capability to administer the complexity of carbon market that Alberta represents. ECCC, I mean, we didn't get to the question about, or the point about information disclosure by governments, but my great irritation with how ECCC is presently running the CFR, the Clean Fuel regulation at the federal level, is that there has been no disclosure of trading and pricing for that market for a year, compared with the BC LCFS that we get monthly prints on prices and at least yearly prints on credit creation and obligations. The California system, you get prices weekly and on a quarterly basis, that supply demand information. So, you know, if they can't run that carbon market right, I don't trust that they're going to be able to administer the Alberta market. That's a challenge of them ramping up their capacity so they can have a nationwide carbon market in the future. Which is, again, to my press, if you're going to implement a CBAM, what you ultimately have to have.
Okay, April, you're a benevolent dictator. What's your wish list for improving, or for, well, both answering Dave's questions and improving carbon markets?
So the thing I think is missing is the demand. Like, we need to create demand for carbon dioxide removal credits. We need new demand. Like, we can't rely on it always being Microsoft and Frontier and the few buyers that there are. We need to somehow attract new demand. And so how do we creatively do that? And one of the ways I think, I was expecting, like years ago, I thought, oh, this is great. Everybody's starting to have these net zero targets, like these corporates. That will like incentivize and create demand in the voluntary market for all of these credits and all of these great projects. And I thought it was going to be fantastical. And now here I am, like having real difficulty marketing credits for these kinds of projects, right? Mm-hmm. And so do I think that the voluntary market is going to be the thing that comes through? If we leave it to like people either that are just going to pay a high price for a credit because they want to advance technology, they want socialized stop rate, whatever, like they are meeting their target. Like, I don't think there's enough demand to support all of what we need to be doing. So I'm going to say out loud that maybe it's time for government procurement, like potentially. Maybe it's time in larger volumes, because truthfully, I don't think like a $10 million purchase necessarily from the federal government, while it's a great start, like isn't going to crack the nut here. And so how do we do that? Like, how do we do that government procurement? And there could be reverse auctions, for example, for projects that would come into play. That would be a way to do it. Like other governments are doing that, that's fine. So government procurement is one. The other crazy thing I will say that is likely to create demand is, what if we add it to the compliance market? What if we say, like in Alberta, emitters have to comply, there's a compliance obligation that they have, different instruments for them to be able to comply. What if we say part of their compliance has to be with CDR credits, like even a small volume? Like, what if we said you must purchase like this credit type? How would that change the market? It would create demand, and I don't mean to make people like uncomfortable or like but it would change the game just enough maybe to move the needle.
Right.
And so I'd like to see some of that conversation happening.
Similar to the limiting the compliance obligation through bank credits is requiring compliance obligation through specific.
How about that? I see Bryan nodding.
Yeah. Would you like to be a benevolent
But he's supposed to be quiet about policy. Never mind. I just said something very confrontational, and then he's like, "What?"
If I was a dictator, I wouldn't be benevolent. So. Sean's been waiting.
Yeah.
So I'll put a question in front of Bryan since I think an R&D question. So I looked to the States, for example, a few years ago, and there's a lot of things happening in the States around CDR, right? Because there was, yes, a lot of incentives with tax credits. We had a lot of sort of pull instruments. But over a long period of time, the U.S. has had a lot of push instruments, right, in terms of pushing research and development. And that they were well linked, I would argue, that went all the way back to the university, all the way through to things like their carbon safe program, right, where you could take a project to do geologic storage and bring it all the way up to maturity and then go to what they call OSED, whatever, past tense, and get money from them to do development. I find here we don't have that, right? Like we have this gap, and I think I heard you say 3 to 5 years was your time frame, which is sort of shocking because 3 to 5 years is an industrial time frame. 3 to 5 years is something that people can expect, industry wants to make returns on. Shouldn't your time frame be 10 to 15 years, 20 years?
Yeah, and it is in the sense that we are investing in, most especially, and it varies, right? So a process engineering innovation is going to take 10 to 15 years and require significant capital investment as you inch up the TRL spectrum. A digital technology can quickly leapfrog and be commercial in under a year. So there's quite a dramatic range. But yes, we do think that long term. We are subject to political cycles, which happen every 4 or 5 years. So that's still a thing. We traditionally haven't had massive overhauls every time there is a political change. Sometimes you just paint it a different color, turn it 45 degrees, and kind of keep doing what you're doing. But we do have that ability to think long term. We certainly, we are improving. We talked about this in the innovation discussion earlier today. I think that we have improved our ability, similar to jurisdictions, not just like the US, but Singapore, Israel, like these startup nation countries. We've come a long ways, but there's still so much more we could do better to be able to really accelerate ideation through to commercialization with all the right supports there at the right time. And that's tough.
So I'll put a wish out. It'd be great if AI wanted to talk to NSERC, right? Because like universities, that's where we get the funding, right? And it's not always, it's hard to get mission-oriented funding out of NSERC, right? So just put that out there.
Yeah.
I'm sure you are, but yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Just reflecting, hearing you talking about, and then I'm a bit worried that we took the carbon loophole, because I'm trying to reflect, so what is it that we really want? And in the big picture, I think about sustainable development, because they're talking about economy, you're talking about policy, you're talking about technology. And then bringing from April, right, the question of how you create demand. And my question is, are we trying to push people a mint-flavored toothpaste that no one wants? What do we really want? Should we be talking about carbon credits, or should we be talking about something else? If it's not working, and we need to create demand, are we offering the people the product they really want? So I want to stay back and say sometimes talking about carbon get us nowhere. I think it's been very powerful to build policy, build strategy, get us in a certain path towards positive. But when I go to communities, I don't talk about carbon. It's a waste of time. So what should we be talking about? I think carbon is important in certain aspects, but not everyone can talk about it. And I wonder whether we should think of markets from a different way. And I don't have an answer. I don't think you may have an answer. I'm just saying that maybe sometime we have to step back from carbon and think of bigger picture.
I think we talk about carbon so much is because that's what pays the bills. Like that's the fungible commodity that like earns the money that we can then invest in the projects and get them deployed, right? And so that's why, I'm not saying it's correct, but that's why the conversation typically goes to carbon, because that's where the money's going to come from, and especially if it's like DAC, for example, versus BECS maybe has a little bit more leeway there. But like that's why. And so I think you're exactly right, though, to like be thinking more broadly about what is the value proposition to doing these projects. And it can vary depending on who you're speaking to. So this is a sell. Like this is like the deploying these projects and attracting investment to these projects. It's a sell. You're selling a concept, a technology, a new way of doing things. And so you must dial into the value proposition for whoever your audience is. And you are right that we should like not get so focused on just the money and how we're going to pay for it, which is basically the carbon conversation. So I applaud you for like bringing us out of the hole and being able to see the full picture of what is the value to like all the people, all the stakeholders involved in doing this. Like, absolutely. Should be top of mind.
Go ahead.
I've talked a lot, but
I'll give you 2 minutes. How about
that? I mean, the most powerful idea I fell in love with in my undergrad, which was in geological engineering, but then sent me the way of economics, was that of an externality, right? An unpriced negative impact. And that is what climate change is. Our challenge is how do we maneuver human behavior to use less carbon in the most efficient, welfare improving or welfare preserving way. Economists like prices because they aggregate lots of information, they are a signal, and they allow for, if markets are constructed right, the most productive allocation of resources. That's why I like them. But the kind of markets that we're building to price this externality are messy. And they are because they're fraught with all of these politics, distributional issues, competitive issues, because we live in a one world atmosphere, but we are nation states and even individual provinces, all with our competitive interests. And these have to be written down in laws that people can count on, can form contracts around, are going to issue these intangible instruments. And I actually find talking about carbon now within industry a very powerful tool. The great, I think, industry tripwire right now, if you go to any major oil company downtown, is what is the price of carbon? What are these tier credits and offsets going to be worth? If I invest in this HDRD plant, what can I count on my CFR credits being worth? And again, back to my wrapping point, streamlining, providing information, having consistent policy, having an outlook for policy is going to be critical for all of these different players making the efficient decisions. You give me 3 minutes. Maybe I just will riff finally. I started my. Fair.
Well, I mean, as I said before, I can't really comment publicly about pricing. So the only value I can bring to your original question is just to say, as somebody who for several years was forced to live a vegan diet, I would have really enjoyed a meat-flavored toothpaste.
That might have been your fun fact.
Meat-flavored toothpaste.
That is disgusting, and
That's what he said.
I can't take that. Meat.
Wow.
New product proposal, niche market.
Wow.
That's where he started. Anyway.
Actually say mint, but pardon me.
Oh, I thought you said meat. That makes more sense.
Any other takers for questions? Okay, we have 4 minutes left. Maybe I'll sneak in one last question. And I think it's like, and I want to ask this because maybe a thread running through some of the talks today was like, is it technology better or worse in achieving objectives? Like, in the sense of like costs, in the sense of like how we feel about it, like the morals behind it. And a common cliche is governments picking winners and losers, and that we don't want them to do that. But I think most of the people in this room would agree that from like, in terms of like reserving and preserving resources, we want the lowest cost technologies or lowest cost solutions to win out. And is like, are we in a place where this is happening? Yes, no, thoughts on improvement. And since we only have 2 minutes, you get like a 30-second answer. And we'll start with Bryan.
Yeah, so I agree the right policy is one that does not pick winners and losers, but the reality is for solutions to be implemented, industry is choosing between technologies, between winners and losers. Those technologies that are being selected from are the winners and losers that venture capital and private equity capital funded, which are also the winners and losers that Alberta Innovates and ERA and NRCan funded through the process. So it is certainly happening because there is finite resources to be able to support technology development.
April?
I think from my perspective, I am like super interested in advancing projects that are economic and that are the lowest marginal cost. There is also something to be said to consider the ancillary benefits that a project also has, right? So I wouldn't do it necessarily winners and losers on cost alone. I would encourage us always to think about the other benefits that may be associated, whether it's water use or like all the things, all the sustainable climate goals should be kind of thought about as we pick which things are deployed. And hopefully it's not mutually exclusive, right? That it's not always that. Oh, Bryan has another thought. No, no, I feel like you did.
So the light bulb?
I did, I saw something. Anyway, I think it's just important to think about the other benefits as well. So yes, we want low cost, but I actually want low cost with like a whole bunch of other benefits.
Yeah, so cost is not everything. Okay, Grant, last word.
Yes, I'll be quick. The mission has to be the net zero future. I view this challenge very much as a central bank-like macroeconomic challenge of managing through uncertainty to a target. It is no accident that Mark Carney with Janet Yellen 3 years ago sketched this very idea about our carbon pricing being run nationally like a central bank by these carbon councils that they proposed. I think that is the ultimate future that we need to be working towards, one where, like a central bank, define mandate, define tools, and forming market expectations so the most efficient investments and decisions can be made and resources can be allocated.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for bearing with our long tangent to carbon markets, which is a passion for most of us on the stage. Please join me in thanking the panel.